Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
Boom. All right, everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. I am Peter Lindbergh, the steward of the Stoa, and the Stoa is a place where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of this very moment. And today we got my buddy, Eric Brown, one of the fine people at High Existence. And he brought today with him Jamie Combs, the creator of 4-Game Model or 4-Game Dynamics. And he goes by the name of Captain Simple on Twitter. And this model, I quite like it, and it's quite elegant, and we're gonna explore it today. And for those of you who are regulars at the Stoa, we talk about, or at least I talk about, something called the metagame. We used to have this metagame mastermind here, and I remember I was doing this presentation for Daniel Kazanjian's Metamind Mastermind group, and I just came up with a term, or a definition on the spot for not on the spot, but beforehand for the metagame. And I defined it as: playing the metagame helps us discover the right relationship with the ecology of games we are currently playing. So the idea there's like an ecology of games, and you can kind of zoom out, see it, and decide which one to play. And I find it quite compatible with this 4-game model because Jamie, as Jamie will talk about, there's like 4 ontological game categories: the short game, the mid game, the long game, the deep game. And they all have kind of, a different way to go about playing them well. So that being said, it's going to be standard Stoa format. Jamie and Eric are going to chat about it. I imagine they might pull me into that conversation too. And then we'll do the Q&A. So if you have any questions, just throw it in the chat. I'll call on you, unmute yourself. If you don't want to be on YouTube, indicate that. So that being said, I will allow Eric and Jamie to unmute themselves, and I'll tag whoever wants to be tagged in.
Okay, we on? Great, thank you, Peter. Well, hello everybody. Hey, Eric. Yeah, today, since we're short on time, I think this is going to be so much fun. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about this funny little conceptual model, 4-game dynamics, which today we're just going to present as kind of a lens and kind of a game, so we can pick up on the metagame frame easily enough. And you guys probably already have lots of lenses to look at what's going on, so this is just another one. The nature of what I want to do today is kind of explain it as quickly as possible because it's nice and simple. And then I'll put it on and kind of look at the nature of what's going on and look at this kind of accelerating complexity that's got everybody a little jumpy, and seeing if this lens is helpful for that. Does that make sense? Again, so if you take it in from the idea of, again, of just a lens, right? And we all start from this common question of, what the fuck is going on, and what should I do, and how should I do it, and where to begin? And I think that there's this common sense of overwhelm. And 4-game takes that and says, okay, let's start in any number of places, but let's start by saying that it is a metagame. And it's a metagame that's characterized by 4 games happening simultaneously. And the nature of what we're trying to do is not to win them, but to balance them, juggle them, get into flow with them. Now that's just a conceit that we have by putting on the lens and playing the game. So we're not trying to make a philosophical statement about that, what it is. But if we're going to address this kind of accelerating complexity coming at us as a mystery, boom, what metaphor are we going to put on that in such a way that we can interact with that in a pleasant way and a productive way? So that's what 4-game is about. And the first kind of idea is, well, part of the nature of the problem is just too much is too much. And there's just too much coming at you. And of course, you're going to be paralyzed in the same way of trying to juggle 15 balls. There's an infinite amount of balls. So the game can't be who can juggle more balls. So 4-games looked at these 4 different games that are happening simultaneously and give them names for them that you're already probably a little familiar with. First one is that everyone knows is their long game. Your long game. This is your narrative, the narrative part of your life. You tell it in story form. It's more than just your plan of what you're going to do. It's more like your life script. and you have it with you right now, and I could sit and we could talk to any one of you and we could pull it out of you. People like Peter who have put it online, we all kind of know a little bit about what his long game is, right? And we're here because of his long game. You know, we're enjoying the mid game that's the fruit of his long game. But so this long game is this narrative realm that we have, and there's all sorts of models within this narrative realm that are fantastic. There's all sorts of tips and tools that are fantastic. There's all sorts of giants in the field, and there's a whole lineage looking back at, wowee, look at the power of long game and what we can do with it. But you can't put long game in your hand. You can't bump your head on it. It's an intangible narrative thing. But if we just say phenomenologically in the present, not trying to make any statement about existence, we could all tell our long game, and it would be very revealing. So that's the long game. Everybody's a little bit familiar with that. Inside that long game, if you start to break it up, of course, you could get it as granular as you like, but the 80-20 of the big chunks within your long game, if I was going to break your long game down, I'm going to want to break it down like a story. What's your role? What's your goal? What's your path? There's obstacles along the way, characters and villains. That whole idiom applies in the world of long game. So that's part of what's going on right now. But if we'd say what's part of going on right now with you, there's more than that, than just the story of what's going on. You also have, say, your short game. You have your inner world going on. Your body's going on, your toenails are going on, thoughts are going on, emotions are going on, all simultaneously. That's your short game. Also a well-known, and lots of different models talk about short game. Martial artists, yoga, yogis, all sorts of people are familiar with short game. Stoics. So managing your short game. And again, in the world of short game, you can break it up into saying it's this swirling mix of mental stuff, emotional stuff, and physical stuff. Simultaneously happening everywhere all over at once. Wowee. So short game, again, all sorts of techniques and people and lineages and tips and tricks of managing that game, except you can't get out of any of these games, but you can play them differently. So a whole different little set of labels for that. But there's more to you than that too. So yeah, you've got the story about what's going on, and you've got your physical sensation and your mental thoughts and your emotional feelings, but you also have the chair you're sitting in, and the computer we're on, and the system we're enjoying together, and the air you're breathing, and you've got a whole mid-game situation around you. Again, which you can get as granular as you like, but mid-game you can bump your head into. That's your environment, that's your systems, that's your actual gadgets. And those work together with your short game and your long game. Again, this isn't anything new. This is just kind of a cleaner way of labeling what you already know to be true, which makes it less teaching, but more showing and then playing. And then the last game is your deep game, which is more of a metaphorical game. And this is an interesting one because deep game goes all the way to the edge of where we would all go if we had hours to talk this out, which is mystery. We'd end up overlooking at this void of mystery and with a cosmic shrug of, I don't know what it is. And if I did, I couldn't put it into words. But when we communicate it, we back down there to some kind of metaphorical sense of what's going on. And I call that your deep game. I don't know what's going on, but it's like a river. I don't know what it's going on, but it's like a parade. And it can be on a macro in terms of your ground of being, or it could be a micro in terms of a project. The Stoa is a digital campfire. That metaphor frames this. So within that deep, so when you're staring at mystery in a 4-game lens, you recognize the name of the game is mystery. There's no escaping that. That's where all the fun is. The next layer, so that's the meta game, if you want. The meta game is mystery. The metagame next is what metaphor are you going to put around that mystery that gives you a sense of identity and purpose and connection and resonance that matches everything else. And then the nature of playing those 4 games well is getting those into alignment or flow of some kind. And you may or may not have ever heard those terms, but you'll probably have been in that state where your short game, your mid game, your long game, and your deep game are all clicking and aligned. And you get this emergent feeling of, man, I am on point. And it feels like, Peter, you've had that. I feel like I've been watching Peter do that for the last couple of months with his podcast and Stoa and all of this. And he's been nice enough to document it. But that kind of feeling where, hey, my deep game in terms of how I conceive of what's going on matches my long game authentically of the role I want to play in the world and what I want to think is important and what I'm not willing to do. And I've got gadgets and environment, a mid game and a community around me. And if I don't have it, I'm going to build it. And that's how I'm going to focus my time and my energy and put my thoughts. And when all of those get tied up, whether it's an individual, a culture, or an organization, whatever you want to call it, wow, suddenly complicated, nuanced things can get done swiftly by a diverse group of people. And that seems to me to be the nature of, well, who gives a shit? Why is it important? Well, I think it's why it's important because a lot of people are facing accelerating complexity, and the nature of what they don't have is a vocabulary of all vocabularies, or a meta gadget to not reduce it, but to refine it so you can access more swiftly. And so what I think you guys will find when you put the lens on and start looking at stuff is you know more than you, in 4-game dynamics, you know more than you think you knew. Because you recognize, oh yeah, check out the long game on Elon Musk. Oh yeah, check out the deep game on this guy or that guy. And suddenly you can learn a lot quicker because you're distilling into a common language, and I find it connects people. And for instance, this whole group you've got is already connected by some kind of common long game. I mean, certainly by the digital campfire mid game, thank you very much, Peter, but also by this broader long game that you're starting to set out, which is what everyone's trying to put their finger on. And having listened to you, it seems like we could have some fun exploring, well, maybe the nature of the long game is stealing the culture. Like, oh, okay, that's a narrative long game you could start to build with. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's some other thing. But the next step, it seems to me, when you have this whole pack of well-intentioned whole thinkers, is they need a common vocabulary so they can go from kind of a Tower of Babylon situation to a little bit coherent action where everybody's getting in their own 4-game generative flow. I'm not trying to take your 4 games and put them in mine. I'm trying to get you so yours are in harmony with who you are and what you want to do and how you conceive it. And that's a very kind of personal, idiosyncratic thing. So it's more of a thing of giving the content and then letting people play as they wish. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I can
Eric,
like, yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, like you guys are having some presentation portion, or do you want me to jump in with questions? How would you like this to?
Well, I'll tag off to Eric or you, but I'll shut
cool.
up for a while if that made sense.
All right.
I think there's one level worth exploring here. Jamie, that was awesome. Thank you again. Good to see everyone at the Stoa. This place is fucking beautiful. I have a few comments to build on what Jamie said. One of the things I've heard Guy Sengstock and the kind of the circling crew talk about a lot is a way of being. You just have this essence to you. One of the best examples is probably someone like Alan Watts, Terence McKenna, people with this character, persona, personality to them. And one of the things that I love about 4-game, and when I first kind of started talking to Jamie about this, was your way of being is the sum total of your 4 games, right? The way you act, the things you use, the shit you're trying to do in the world, like that. And what it allows for is like, well, you can actually tweak all of these dials. If you want to be a different way, if you want to be a different person, tweak some of the dials that you're doing, right? Tweak the metaphor that you're following. I think when people get into like the spiritual world a lot, their deep game narrative actually changes fundamentally. And you can also see how it shifts down and shifts up. If you change the metaphor of how you view reality, your short game, your feelings, your thoughts will change as a result. It cascades down, but it also cascades up. You know, you can see Clean Your Room with Jordan Peterson, right in the mid game, right? If you actually wanted to change any of them, you can start anywhere. That's a line that Jamie has that's freaking awesome as well, right? Pick a game, start anywhere. If you want to make a change, you can actually just focus on these. I think another thing that's worth addressing here is if any of these are misaligned, like if your work doesn't actually match up with what you state your role is or what you state like the metaphor is, you'll feel that friction, and it comes in like anxiety, depression, confusion. And so there is just a sense of, yeah, if you can get everything in a line, make it all cohesive and coherent, you'll actually thrive a lot more from it. And again, just the aesthetic, simple package that Jamie has here is what appealed to me just extremely about this whole thing. And what Jamie and I really clicked on in one of our first conversations was, oh, this isn't just an individual thing. Like you can take this and you can put it for schools of thought. Like what's the 4-game of Zen, right? What's the 4-game of Christianity? What's the 4-game of yoga? What's the 4-game of COVID? right? Jamie and I were talking about that a little bit, right? It messed up everyone's mid game, started trickling down into their short game, probably changed what you thought you could do with your long game. Maybe if you thought it was like the wrath of God was affecting the deep game. But so you can do events, you can do people, you can do everything just through this lens. And you know, this group is beautiful of hosting a lot of different ideas, a lot of different people, a lot of different concepts. And sometimes we can get into a mess of talking past each other. I'm reminiscing on the Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, what is truth thing, where they were all actually trying to talk about the same thing, but talking at different levels of it. And it just became this shit show, basically. If you can actually have this shared language where it's like, okay, mid game level, what's going on here? Deep game level, what's going on here? Even people with highly polarized or highly opposite or highly opposing views can actually come together for some semblance of a sane, reasonable conversation. And I think the last point on this is, you know, this zooms up from individual to a company, to a community, but to a culture as well. You know, you look at East versus West, we talked about how things trickle down. Well, if you have a story that you're a kind of ghost in the shell, you know, pulled here from the heavens, you know, put here to kind of suffer nature, well, that affects how everything in your life would show up. But if you take, you know, there's this kind of Eastern culture, like we're emerging from nature, we're part of it. You see that reflect down into culture, into even the way they write, right? Their language is highly picture based, right? It's more metaphorical. It's not as literal as the kind of Western anglicized alphabet. Like there's just a huge ramification, long tail effect to just how you set up these games, how cultures set up these games, how companies set them up. And there's always been a sense of how do we get like breakthrough velocity with the stuff that's going on here, because it's so absolutely critical, it's so absolutely essential. But so many of us are either trapped in smaller communities, have trouble getting it out, have trouble making people care. And Jamie's package of just this relentlessly simple, relentlessly concise package that's actually highly aesthetic. The whole thing can be boiled down to those two pictures that I shared earlier. Like this is the stuff that can actually virally spread. And that's again, what appeals to me so much about this model is it's encapsulates almost everything.
We lost your audio there for a moment, Eric.
Oh shit. I think all I was saying was, you know, one of the advantages I think to this is that the whole thing can actually be summed up in those two pictures that we were looking at, right? Just the 4-game breakdown and how they're all nested within each other. And if you can just ship that off to people, be like, here, start here, let's do this. You actually just bring together everyone and get that kind of critical mass, the viral outbreak of shit that's extremely useful to people. So I think that's my little riff on all of that.
Cool. That was my internet that was popping in and out, so sorry about that. Jamie, do you want to add anything, or should we pivot to the Q&A portion?
I think no, we can pivot to you know, matching up to with what you're doing, because now here we are looking at culture, wondering what I think if you put the lenses on and you're going to say, okay, the meta game is how do we play our 4 games well? Our collective problem is how do we get our 4-game shit together before it's too late? I mean, language it as you wish, you know. But I think part of that question, which we can all look at, then we all share looking at it, is whatever it is, as Eric says, we're going to have to be able to put it and articulate it in a simple, clear enough, direct enough way that we can engage a lot of people. And so I think simplicity and aesthetics are going to have to be part of it to get to the next piece. And that's why I think this whole group and what you're doing, Peter, is that's the group of people who's naturally going to come up with something like that and do it. I think, so yeah, no, I think share it and get talking about whatever's on everybody's mind. And I think we'll find if you take what's on your mind and look through a 4-game lens, you might find a good insight or two.
Excellent. So I'll launch us off with a first question. If you have any questions, throw it in the chat. So yeah, like what came to mind is when you were saying that this whole project, I'm kind of putting my games out there, if you will, especially with my journaling. It's almost like I'm like writing the code of my like long game, kind of all the games really, or like writing the script to it live, and I'm inviting other people into that process. I'm like part of me is just like, why am I even doing this right now? Like it's really vulnerable, but it's actually rich because I'm like, I don't have to hide anything. And what came up there is Samuel Bergia, who is a sense maker in residence here at the Stoa. He has something called live players versus dead players. And in essence, a live player is a person or institution that can basically create something that hasn't been created before. And a dead player can only be effective following a script. And so, like, and this is the whole thing about authenticity, which I think the etymology of that is to be the author of one's own life. So you're like authoring your kind of your own script. So do you have any thoughts about that, about this sort of like self-authoring process with each games? And I find it really useful too, kind of like honing in on, okay, this is a mid game that I got to write. I'm following like a dead script here, I'm following a dead script of the long game, etc.
Yeah, I would say all the life scripting stuff, that's a great in 4-game speak, that's a real long gaming skill. Absolutely that. So, and that's turning what's going on into a story that kind of pulls you towards it and feels authentic. So I would say that that's, now you can tell a story about the changes in your mid game, or you can tell a story about the evolution of your 4 games. Like if we were going to interview you, Peter, I'd want to talk to you about the evolution of your 4 game. Well, you didn't always have this mid game. You didn't always have this, you know, and put it together. But so you could, when I think of life for authoring, I always kind of put 4 game authoring. Author not your life, the role you want to be, the mid game you'd like to have, the activities you'd like to do, the feelings you'd like to feel. You won't hit it, of course, but that specificity helps give pull. And the more aligned it is, and the more you can see it, you know, that's when everybody's talking vision and, oh my God, I got drawn to it. Those are 4 games that are really personally aligned. And so self-authoring for me is a great long game. So, you know, Jordan Peters says self-authoring, good long game advice, clean your room, good mid game advice. A good example of starting anywhere.
Yeah, I have one comment to add on that, which is you know, it's nice to have an idea that the work you're doing is actually effective, or that it's actually going to work, and you're not just kind of spraying and praying a bunch of random shit everywhere. And again, you know, I spoke, if any one of these things is lacking, you're actually going to feel it in whatever way that is. If it's short, mid, it's probably just a physical like discomfort, anxiety thing. But if it's on the upper levels, like you're talking existential dread, like complete nihilism, stuff like that. So if you can almost use it to diagnose where you're at, right? If you feel like life is completely pointless and yet you're filling it with the short mid-game stuff, cars, money, you know, fancy stuff, it's never going to fix it because you're not addressing it in the right realm. You actually have to get your story and why you're here in check, which has absolutely nothing to do with the material world, right? Because it's intangible, right? It actually gets less tangible as you go up. And so it's like, look, if you actually do want to self-author, figure out what you're actually lacking in, and then that actually gives you a sense of what you can do to fix those things and address them and bring them into line. Because there are a whole bunch of people, you know, running the hamster wheel of like, well, let me just get the smartwatch, optimize myself, and that'll suddenly fix the grand narrative of why I'm here. It's like, no, man, that's not how that works. So actually it can be used to kind of hone your focus and what you're actually working on. Because yeah, you know, if you break them all down, where am I now? Where do I want to be? How do I want to feel? You know, then you have that path. Then it's just a matter of showing up and doing it, rather than always feeling like I don't know what I need to do next. It actually gives you some like answers to that, some steps.
Like in an inverse of that too, Tim Ferriss came to mind, like, you know, the knowing the right game domain. Like I think he said something once where it's like, let's say if you are feeling bad, maybe because you didn't have a good night's sleep or something, and then you're trying to like, you know, have an existential crisis and try to solve the life's mysteries. And meanwhile, you just need to eat right or go to bed at a certain time and focus on that kind of mid game or short game.
Yeah, I would say Ferriss is a good example of a whole thinker. He'll point out a problem that presents over here, but maybe there's a solution over here. But also a good example of, since there's not a common word for it, we don't quite know when he's jumping to a deep game thing, to a short game thing, to a mid game thing. So it helps, I think, regular people kind of digest these 4 game proficient people, I can understand what they're saying. I can understand Jordan Peterson. I can understand Elon Musk. I may not be able to juggle 50 balls, but I can distill it into the fourth 80-20, what he's talking about, which I found allows you to learn a lot quicker from a lot more people.
Well, actually, the Ferris example is actually fantastic because it shows the evolution of the games over time. Because if you're following like right now what he's been going through in the past few years, like he's doing the psychedelic medicine push, but actually like this week, he released a big thing about childhood trauma, addressing like deep inner emotional wounds. And so he progressed from, again, trying to fill like the trauma higher level stuff with the success, fame, money stuff. Didn't work at all. Started doing some kind of narrative inner emotional work, got more results, and is actually like, again, he's aligning it and seeing a lot of results from it. So I think he's a fantastic example of, yeah, you just got to put your effort in the right places and it'll actually come through for you.
Yeah, and a good example of starting anywhere and getting everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Rain, you had a few questions, if you can choose one.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for being here, Eric and Jamie. I had a question about this. You mentioned it a couple times, the benefit of a shared language, a shared framework, which seems, true a priori that we need to have this mutual understanding and mutual terms. In terms of the cultural and intellectual landscape, finding our way, how I see it, out of this postmodern morass where we can actually make sense of things again and say that some things are true, or at least more true than others, is a big task without falling back into modernist paradigms that say this is the one way to talk about things. So to make it more personal, I'm sort of like uninspired, so to speak, from another model or another framework. So how would you propose to engage metamodern thinkers who really don't care what the tools, what the words of the framework are, as long as it's something that they can fluidly step into in order to make sense in that moment, in that context?
Yeah, I would say that's just exactly what it's for. You have a long game, call it whatever you want. You have a mid game, you have a short game. You don't like the language or the frame or whatever, but the nature of you progressing from whatever state of affairs you are now to a more complex, richer, one way or another, one model or another, one yoga or another, it's going to be taking this multi-dimensional, whatever you call it, situation you find yourself in, and being able to put it in your own mind in such a way that you could feel like you've got some agency on it and take things from a mental realm and put them into a mid-game realm. So it's really agnostic about forcing the language down everyone. We're really fussy about it. It's a lens, call it what you want, pick your own metaphor. This is just kind of getting started to make the point of whatever you want to call those dimensions, you can't not have them. And we can get more granular, we could make more dimensions, we could forget all the forms and have no dimensions at all. But there's some virtue, if you get it to just a few, you can have a high leverage without being too overwhelmed, which I found has allowed you to get complex things done over time with a lot of people who do have different models. Like, I don't have to agree on a lot of things if we have the same long-term goal, right? If we have the same short game attitude, what's going on in your mind and mine is different. We'll get along just fine. So it allows you to not have to do that and get those bases covered any which way that works with people. One of my early jobs as a kid is I was a trainer, and people want to come and they want to talk about something instead of doing it. And it helps fix that. It's like, instead of getting hung up on the lingo, it's direct pointing is a little bit of the spirit. So I find the metamodern people are the most interesting because they've gone and they recognize that it's multidimensional. They've done a lot of research down a lot of different dimensions. So they've got a lot of models and they can connect a lot of things. What they find when they look through 4 games is they start to put things together. They're like, oh, I noticed the similarities between the long games of Aldous Huxley and Alan Watts, or the mid game between King Arthur and Alexander, or whatever. So I think you guys have a lot of fuel for the fire, if that makes sense. So I'm really sensitive to, no, it's absolutely not a dogma. It's a way of looking, and we can all put it on and look at it and react to it differently. But if the nature of someone's life or a company or a culture is they're stuck, when you put on the lens, you'll find one of their 4 games is jacked up. Their long game doesn't make sense. Their mid game is counterproductive. Their behaviors are self-destructive, or their framing is self-defeating. And no amount of fixing one without awareness of the other is going to get them out of the problem. You know, no amount of cleaning your room will work if you never get around to authoring your life. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I actually don't have more to say directly on that, but one of the things that I also love about this is like, this is where we're at with this. Like, I'm looking in the chat, like, these are freaking amazing questions. And for me, it's actually just a sense of, I would love to know what your answer is, right? You guys have the graphics, you know, you have the language now. It's just like, yo, we're doing this on the fly. Like, we're building this as we go, right? We jumped off the cliff and we're building the airplane. There's definitely a feeling in me where it's like, yeah, this has wings, right? This thing can run, it can definitely fly, and it's been useful in my own thinking, my own life, my own conversations, but we're definitely not here like we have all the answers. Like, there's and that's part of why we actually were excited to come to the Stoa and stuff, introduce it to some smart ass people, because it's like, look, yo, if this resonates, like, let's build this together. Like, let's answer some of these questions, because they're freaking really good questions.
Very cool. There's a question on relationships, which is at the edge of my thinking. I was actually writing a journal about this. So Michael, if you would unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, I was thinking, like, how does it fit into people in your life, like close family, spouses, children, friends, and also in your second circle of community and people at work, and also in the wider circle if you look to a town or a nation or globally. So of course it's not in a silo. So what are you thinking about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find a lot of the relation bit of the family comes into that long game role piece. Like, what roles, you know, I distinguish role from identity, right? Your role as a father, your role as a business, a role as a teacher, a role as a steward. Those are the roles you kind of commit to from a long game point of view. So in terms of social interaction, a lot of what's going on is we're trying to play our roles well. And so a lot of that in terms of relationship, until you get to really close personal, is we're relating role to role, because I don't know all the intimate pieces about you, you know, in business. And this group, I think, starts to have some identity, because not only do we share a goal, some version of a cleaner, greener future, everybody's trying to figure out what their roles are in that longer plan. And that's why I think a lot of community, you have to have a long game, because before we know our roles and how we're going to relate, well, what are we trying to do and how are we trying to do it? And what do we think's going on and what are we going to use to get there? So I find that a lot of the social relations, once there's trying to be a purpose, there's something to be done, the long game roles start to bring out the requirements of the relationship, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like that.
Any follow-up, Michael?
Yeah, I'm thinking, like, when suddenly if there's a conflict between the roles, your children want this, but you have to do an extra project at work at the same time. A family member wants this of you. So how do you handle, like, the divergence of the social?
Yeah, that's a great case. That's a multi-dimensional problem.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you've got your career to worry about. You're all anxious, and maybe you know, that's a perfect example, and that's where the agency is. If you say, hey, you've got a real 4-game problem in that situation, what are you going to do about it? You're going to do a mid-game remedy. You're going to do a short-game remedy. You're going to fit. You know, so it gives you options, I think, to take a situation like that without any kind of framework, your emotions are going to be the presenting problem, and then you're not going to be able to have a clear way of what to do, how to do it, that's going to happen immediately. And maybe that's your long game. Maybe you want to live life like that, you know, a leaf in a mountain stream. That's one way to do it, but it's still a long game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks.
I got a follow-up statement / question. In the pickup artist community, they have something called game. And I may or not have been involved in that community in the past. I'll leave that a mystery, but I dabbled in some of the literature, let's put it that way. And yeah, they call something game, having good game. and basically you're good with women. You can kind of, you know, pick up someone you're attracted to, and you can kind of, like, to use Martin Buber's I-it relating versus I-thou relating. Like I-it relating is you're instrumentalizing someone to get something. And then you can have like I-it games with kind of pickup artists or sales or negotiation or whatever. And then I-thou relating is sort of connecting with someone on a deeper level, like recognizing the God within each other. And a lot of these intersubjective practices that we practice here at the Stoa kind of gesture towards the I-thou way of relating. So how do, like, if you want to say if those are two different types of games, the I-it constellation of games and the I-thou constellation of games, how would that fit in this 4-game model?
Yeah, interesting. You could do, well, if you think I-it versus, you know, if you go to deep game, then you could say lots of ways we're going to look at deep game. There's going to be I and it, self and other, and I'm going to have some kind of dualistic deep game that sets you up in relation, as opposed to a holistic deep game that says, hey, me and the other, in my metaphor, we're really the same thing. So those, I see those as kind of riding on two different deep games of what's going on. And when you recognize that, hey, we're kind of the same thing. I'm not here to exploit you. You've got 4 games. I'm here to empower you and light you up so you can go do what you want to do. I'm not trying to put ideas in your head. I'm trying to give you a language so you can go write your own poetry. That difference. And that's where I think in the deep game, the more holistic point of view it is, and it doesn't matter necessarily the form, but just the spirit of Gestalt. The back goes with the front goes all of a piece. It can be mysterious, but it's not alienating to each other. I think that drills down to a short game attitude that you have with other people, which is like, hey, hooray, I'll get your 4 games stronger. What's more satisfying than that, as opposed to what you're saying, that instrumentalized, where I've got some alienating deep game that makes me go through life trying to get people, you know, to execute steps for me. And so that's where you might have a deep game problem, but it wouldn't even know it, but it would present, and you're this very exploitive person. So a lot of people, when they change or they have a psychedelic experience or some reason up in their deep game, they get that little holistic blip, and they realize the left hand isn't out to get the right hand, they're of a piece. Then I think that kind of instrumental way of looking at things goes away. You become less looking at the world like a gold mine and more looking like the world like a garden. And therefore your role changes in what you're trying to do. So if that makes sense.
Would that be like the flip between the finite game versus infinite game, and use Karsh's language?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. You could have finite games within the infinite game, but you take them sincerely, not too seriously. And that's why the whole game metaphor, again, if the framing of it, one of the virtues of the game as a metaphor, whoever uses it, is by the time it drills down to your short game, it helps you have confidence and a playful feeling, which is what you need to get into flow. So if I have divine judgment as my deep game, it's hard to get playful divine flow vibe going in my short game. So that's why a lot of these things where you're trying to elicit confidence, they want to try to make it some type of game, because that's, we can engage with games again with sincerity without too much seriousness. And that's what it gives it pull, and you want to do it for its own right. And as long as it's a generative game, and that's what, if the 4 game elements are just right, it's a generative game. You're playing a generative game, Peter. The Stoa is a generative piece of mid-game. The more you do it, the better you get, because you've got your things aligned. That's the kind of thing we're after. Whereas if your deep game was some kind of alienating thing, and so all this was a exploitive money grab, that would be a different 4 games that you don't have. That wouldn't be generative from my point of view. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I got a little comment on that as well, which actually ties into, I think this is going to tie into Michael's earlier question as well, which is there's been some semblance of this conversation where we're actually coming to this with answers already, like, oh, let me look at Zen through this and actually just inject into it. I think it can also be really useful to start pulling things out and actually getting the initial questions rather than the answers for them. Like with Michael's thing about family and like choosing between family and money. If I actually look at my life through this and where the tension is arising, a question comes up where it's like, am I actually okay putting my work before my family? And that could spawn very, very beneficial things for you. And I think to Peter's question as well, it's like, are we actually okay with some of the smartest people our countries produce earning the most amount of money to contribute to a global socioeconomic system that treats the world as it? Like, is that actually, are we comfortable continuing that? And that question can come from the lens, but it's actually a starting point. It's not the end insertion. It's actually, okay, now I'm seeing where the friction is coming from, why my stomach feels weird when the smartest ass people are trying to sell me stuff on Facebook. And it's like, where do I go with that? What does realigning that look like? And so, yeah, I think this actually ties into Jamie's point. It can be generative in that way of actually adding more, giving us places to start, rather than just coming from this as a kind of post hoc analysis.
So the long game of stealing the culture is back at the Stoa. So officially, after hearing that, I stopped using that phrase, but I'm back. Do you have anything to add to that, Jamie, before I go to the next question?
Nope, that was good.
Okay. Alex, you had a question.
Thank you, Peter. So I'm trying to see if I can phrase this question. The very language of game is something that you do with others in society. So it has a lot to do with external validation. It says my connection is unstable, so I hope I'm not too choppy here. So it seems to me it's a very individual lens to look at society and who you are and how you interface with society. It's kind of like what Neo and Morpheus do when they plug into the Matrix. You know, they're in the Matrix and they're playing a game, and then they come out of the Matrix. Presumably, when you come out of the Matrix, you're that metaphysical self. You're that true identity, and you even have it here. Who is that true self? Who is that real you? Who is that metaphysical consciousness that's aware that you have a body on Earth? And presumably there's no game. That's your true identity. So for me, it's contradictory to say that there's a metaphysical game, because that's external validation. Like, you know, I'll get laid by saying I'm like some great guru, right? And I'm getting this external validation because I have this deep game, right? But that's not why one should have a deep game. One should have a deep game, not for any external validation, but because that's your true self. So I'm finding a contradiction in terms there.
Sure. Yeah. Let me help. It's that the real thing we're saying is mystery. The only thing we're asserting, the whole game is played on mystery, which isn't even asserting anything about a true self. I don't know. The truest thing I know, I don't know. It's a cosmic shrug. Now, if I want to handle it, I can put any kind of frame on it I want. If I don't want to put game, I could put dance. I could put melody. I could put garden. It's already a conceit to put the frame on it. So I'm not mistaking the metaphor. But to get a sense of identity, you're going to have a relationship to the metaphor, because you can't put language on mystery. So if it's if it's kind of like an ocean, well, then my identity is maybe kind of like a wave on the ocean. Now, that's not to say that is what it is. It's just what it's kind of like. And that's where my short game is going to resonate. Oh, if that's what I really think, if I really look in the face of mystery and I say, God, I don't know, but it's kind of like an ocean. Well, then that's deep game metaphor is the one I'm operating with. And my identity is going to drill down. Is that going to be the final truth? No, you couldn't be in words anyway. So it's not trying to make that, I'm aware of that mistake you're talking. It's not trying to assert that. That's why starting at mystery, I think, is the most honest place. Then we can say, great, let's play with language and see what we can come up with as we all stare at this mystery. Does that make sense? But that's a good question, or specifically trying to avoid that conflict.
It's a great, thank you. I find it so interesting because yesterday we had a session on nihilism. I don't even know how to say the word. And this seems to be the opposite. This is the anti-nihilism. There's actually meaning in what we do.
Well, because with wonder, in mystery, I don't use unknowing or anything. I use mystery because the flip side of mystery is curiosity and wonder, and that's just what's going on. And that you can self-validate, even if you don't know anything. You can say, man, that's true, and that everybody has, regardless of their culture or whatever they put on it. And if we can start in good faith there, that saves a lot of trouble downstream.
I think there's one other thing which is almost getting to semantics, but I agree with how you were describing the game at some level, but the other way I would look at game is like, or at least play, because you play games of, you know, something you do for its own sake, right? It's done because it is just beautiful in and of itself. You actually don't do it. You don't give a damn about anyone else. I'm doing this because it gives me deep satisfaction, deep meaning, deep purpose, whatever it is. And I think there is a deep game lens where it's like, what is going on here if it's not playful? Like, if it wasn't going to be playful, I wouldn't do this. This seems like a lot of work for whatever the heck is orchestrating this. Like, if I wasn't doing this for fun or because the thing in itself was beautiful, it probably just wouldn't be done. And so in that, yeah, I think that's another framing of at least the game semantics or the game wording, because it's like, yo, it's a thing in itself. You don't actually have to play any of these games. You could just sit and kind of do nothing, be an NPC, you know, just go along. But they are fun games to play should you choose to actually like show up at the table and start playing them.
Yeah, and the frame of game forces you to think of play. You know, so
Yeah.
we're going to be playing here. It's not like working.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
Or culture war, or culture war, or something. Some frame that's you can't get out of it. There's no scenario. Now you're locked in from the metaphor, and it's going to be tribes fighting and killing, and there's no playing in that. And if you're trying to get into generative flow, which requires a sense of kind of creative wonder and play and authenticity, you've snipped it off before you've even started. And then you layer into that a mid-game that's not conducive and all of that. So these kind of non-obvious significance of the deep game. And the play bit, because it's a short hop from play to creative. It's a short hop from it's a mysterious universe to let's build this on creative. And we're trying to get you into generative flow so you can be in creative flow, you know, playful, creative, that spirit where, yeah, it's coming out of you. Nobody's telling you. It's that emergent thing in the moment. We're trying to spark that.
Mm-hmm. And another thing came to mind with the framing, and this may be a question to Eric. So like Benita Roy at a previous session, she said like the problem with a lot of these sense-making spaces is there's so much epistemic fat. That was the term she used. And I teased her. I'm like, the term epistemic fat is kind of epistemic fat, Benita, right? It's like, and you know, like people in this space, and, you know, I'm sure Eric, we would like geek out and like, you know, masturbate about all these mental models and these concepts. But like from my Dale Carnegie background, I'm a Dale Carnegie trainer. It's the great thing about Dale Carnegie. He just simplified things and just spoke in very common language. And to double click on Rain's point before, it's kind of cool having kind of like a slew of mental models. They all might be pointing like the fingers at the moon, but picking one that really resonates with the audience you're going to speak to.
Yep.
So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so among my friend groups here, I'm probably the one just most personally interested in the whole kind of sense-making Stoa space. And the amount of times I've sent a Daniel Schmachtenberger video to people and it's never been watched is tragic, is absolutely tragic, because I'm a huge fan of everything going on in this space. And I was like, this is critical, like, let's do this, all hands on deck. And it is just falling, like it is just falling right at the face. We never even get in the door. And it's tragic because at least at the end of the day, everyone in the world is going to have to be playing some game. You know, this is the classic game B talk as well, where it's like, at some point in time, we're all going to have to get on that ship. And there are a lot of people who have no time, energy, capacity to do some of this. And so there is this just, what is the most relentlessly, mercilessly simple, aesthetic, approachable way that people can actually get in the door and not feel overwhelmed by the freaking Jordan Hall, Daniel Schmachtenberger back and forth that they can't even follow at all. This at least feels like a bridge, right? The stepping stones of like, here, you know, let's talk in this way. Like, here's some language that you can use so you can actually show up, because I know you want to. Maybe you're just nervous. Maybe you just, you know, have a, I don't know, lower energetic capacity right now. But there is just this sense of the simple, the aesthetic, stuff that can be memed, right? Like, by definition, like stuff that can be memed and spread virally. That is actually what we need to get the beautiful, absolutely beautiful, brilliant ideas people are coming up with here just to everyone else. because it's super easy, and the Stoa is fantastic at this. It's super easy to feel like everyone in the world is here, but like they're not. They're really just not. Go look at the trending YouTube videos of the day, and like you'll be surprised how far apart they are from what's going on here. And so, yeah, is there anything that we can offer people that is just, here's 5 minutes, this is super approachable, I think you'll love it too, it might actually help. I don't think we can underestimate just how important that stuff is. And, you know, again, it's what made me land with Jamie so strongly. It was like, this feels, maybe if it's not the perfect answer, like a damn good step in the right direction, because this thing is almost more aesthetic than it is conceptual. And that was like, something feels right about that.
You know, it helps, at least me anyway, come from a place of appreciation. You can be like, wow, check out the long game on Daniel Schmackenberger. Wow, check out the mid game Limberg's making. Wow, check out the short game on Eric Brown. And it has this ability of whatever you want to call it, we're all in the same bucket. And you can, you know, what's the thing? You know, bandits in the street recognize each other immediately. Yeah, everybody that's trying to improve things from a multidimensional insight, it seems like put a circle around all of them. They have a lot more in common, and particularly once there's a little bit of common lingo, it's not a reduction bit, it's almost a refinement and a connecting.
Maybe Gray, you had a question.
Hi, thank you guys. I'm loving this session. It's really energetic. I'm feeling like it's really alive for all of us. I'm curious about like how tight are the compartments of these 4 different games? Does the deep game have like prominent influences on your short game? Does your short game go all the way to your deep game and vice versa?
Good question. The answer I think is loose and personal. And the cool thing about it is once you get the lingo and the spirit of what we're talking about, you can go check your own, which is what you really, and that's where it really gets interesting. And there's no right or wrong in it. There's just what it is and what you can tweak. And once you start noticing, but one of the things I think a lot of people notice once they look at it is the relationship between their emotional space, which is where a lot of problems show up. Non-linguistic, just, and if you don't have a thing to put it, it's like, yeah, that's where it presents. But part of that is because your long game is jacked up and no amount of, you know, Pringles is going to fix it, if that makes sense. But the thing is really looking inside of you. And then once you get a sense of, you know, your own 4 games, well, then you don't have anything to apologize. You just, a sense of calm comes on because it's not right or wrong, but you can at least step back and articulate it from your point of view. And then nobody can make you wrong, if that makes sense. And you can be really curious and admirable about the parts that they have that are different, and then kind of meet on common bits without any kind of dominator weirdness going on.
Yeah, and I actually have two images from Jamie that I think are fantastic ways to answer this. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. So Jamie continually comes back to this kind of nested image where your inner is nested in your mid, nested in your long, nested in your deep, which I think is absolutely correct. And it kind of shows the proportion of influence. Like your deep game, your long game will have a substantial impact on what your short and mid actually end up looking like. You can go the other way, but I think it's a lot harder. And then the other one I love is the kind of torus loop, energetic donut, where it actually circles back in on itself, right? Once you wrap up a deep game, it then finds its way into, well, what does my Tuesday look like based on that, right? If I suddenly believe that, you know, I'm following the kind of yoga Hindu philosophy, well, you know, the way I spend my day is going to look a lot different. And then it trickles back up. And then you actually see like, oh, okay, I'm a dedicated practicing yogi now. And that reaffirms your relationship to your, you know, your long narrative and your deep game, and it all just circles back in on itself. I think those are 2 really useful ways to look at how those things kind of play and dance with each other.
You know, it's fun in that sense of once you've got the lens for it, you can look at someone's 4 games from the outside, but then you can do the thought experiment of getting inside their 4 games and looking from the inside out. And sometimes if there's somebody that you really admire or feel connected to, try that. What is it like looking through their eyes, feeling that thoughts all the same time? You can get a connection with other people and learn on different levels, kind of non-linguistically.
So we're almost at the hour. Would you guys have like 5 minutes to stay afterwards, or do you have to leave right at the hour? Yeah. So maybe we'll just do 1 or 2 questions or statements. Margaret, you had a cool question or cool statement, if you can unmute yourself.
Sure. Hi. So yeah, this whole conversation, thank you, Jamie and Eric, very much for sharing. This is really interesting. This whole conversation very strongly reminds me of a game that I know I played briefly in childhood and come back to periodically throughout my life, which other people might have also played, where essentially the game was you could not mention the game. And as soon as you mention the game, you lose. And if you mention it to someone, then you cause them to lose as well. And this feels, I mean, it works with the Taurus model also of like an inverse kind of turning that inside out, where instead of the rule being like, you don't mention the game, it's like, no, we are all playing the game. Let's make that explicit and then move from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I hadn't heard of that. That does sound like a fun game. But yeah, there's a little bit of that, and there's a little bit of the sense of, again, once you hold the lens lightly and you're not making a philosophical statement, you can't escape the games. You can't not play the games. You can't leave your mid game. You can't not, you know. And then once you kind of accept that, there's kind of a, oh, okay, we're doing this vibe, and then it's a happening, and a lot of anxiety, it seems to go away. But kind of in the spirit of what you're talking about. It's not so much talking about swimming, it's actually swimming, you know?
Very cool. And actually, Margaret and I were in discussion of doing a series of the STOA short-term series called Communitas Club, where we're working on the name, where we're going to look at different social games like nonviolent communication, insight dialogue, restorative circles, verbal keto, and brings a practitioner in to kind of play with us. So that's going to be really fun. So yeah, I think we should wrap it up. I'll let you guys, Jamie, Eric, do you have any kind of closing thoughts for us? This has been a really awesome and thought-provoking. Actually, I'll share one thought before I hand it over to you guys. Like my pushback game, the only concern I have is like, this is one of those like models that when you learn it, it's like you want to apply to everything, right? Like you're already making jokes. Like when you first like, oh, you're playing a short game right now, playing a long game. And the whole Maslow's hammer, or like, you know, if you have a hammer, everything becomes a nail. So that's the thing that's coming to my mind. Like, well, am I going to like overuse this, overextend this model? That being said, any responses to that, and any final words from you guys?
Yeah, no, you're right. That does what come up. The first thing about is it's reductionist. It's, oh, you know, there's this sense of like, no, Captain Simple. And for me, that's the first test. There you go. There's a short game of motion. Feel what that feels like. Start anywhere. And so it's that kind of, yeah, I don't know, sneakily simple, which I think is kind of part of its charm. But you're right. That is the kind of first thing. And that's why in these early days, we kind of put it out there without too much explaining to attract people like you and like Peter, who recognize it without being explained too much, because you're already doing it well. You're just not using the lingo. But to close up, I would just say that in my telling of the tale, if the nature of what we're trying to do is get our 4-game shit together before it's too late, and the headline coming out of the STOA is, hey, maybe we're going to steal the culture. We're going to take all these whole thinkers who can recognize the multidimensionality of what's going on, but they've got different lingos, but the intention's good. Maybe the next stage of this long game is some of us start sharing a common lingo and moving the ball a little bit on sub-projects in precisely the same way Peter's demonstrating with the STOA on a smaller scale. So it feels to me like that's the nature of what a positive long game looks out, and it can be dressed up in any number of ways. But what I think Eric and I are doing are kind of going around and just direct pointing to people who are already doing it well. And I think that starts to be a community of, this is how the long game starts to think different. People like you doing things like this. And I think the non-obvious move is there has to be a playful frame to it, because war frames and whatnot are just going to get you more war.
Yeah, I guess I have 2 really quick comments. To address your thing, Peter, every person here has probably seen that kind of multi-panel cartoon where it's a bunch of dots and it's like, this is knowledge. And then there's some connecting lines and it's like, this is experience. And then there's a whole path and it's like, this is wisdom. Everyone knows or has a sense of what the actual dots are. They're like people, places, things, events, whatever, life experience. What is the lines? What are the lines? What's the connective tissue that puts all that together? Perhaps something like this. It is something that ties together all these disparate things, whether it's stuff in your own life, whether it's different mimetic tribes, whether it's different levels of what the fuck is going on. And so actually, like I say that because if done well, this thing should actually just disappear into the background and serve just as connective scaffolding and never actually need to be mentioned, right? But the problem is that as it stands right now, there's just a bunch of isolated islands doing a whole bunch of wicked stuff with no real way of talking to each other or talking past each other or thinking that they're actually doing different things when they're doing the same thing. And so if there can be this little connective tissue that puts everything together, which again, Jamie's relentlessly simple, like 4 lenses with 3 things in each might be a fantastic way to do that. And really my only closing comment is one of the things I mentioned earlier, which is just like, yo, we're building this. Like, if you think this is cool, answer some of the questions and send it. Like, I think this is relentlessly useful. I asked Jamie to go on a conversation with me, and that's literally why I'm here today. Like, this is very early days, and if it resonates, if it lands, like, you know, come build the future. Come build that connective tissue, that shared language with us, because, yeah, it's a fun game to play.
Beautiful. So I'll make some closing announcements in a moment, but my friends, thank you so much for coming to the Stoa today. That was a lot of fun, a lot of gratitude being sent your way. And in open invitation, if you ever want to workshop some kind of session in the Stoa that could maybe be ported to the Wisdom Gym about like how to build a 4-game muscle, how to kind of play it, let me know. I'm happy to field test it here at the Stoa. So a couple events. Tomorrow, we have Agnes Callard, a famous philosopher. She's going to have a title of the talk is "Can You Know You're Wrong?" And then she's basically asking the question, how do we know when we're wrong? So that should be cool. That's at 8 p.m. Eastern time. Tyson, I'm going to tag you in, my friend. You got some stuff to talk about.
Sure. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Eric and Jamie, for doing the session. I enjoyed it quite a lot. And anytime that playfulness is a big theme, I start to get excited to plug my event as a space for people to come play with self-expression. We practice freestyle rap and spoken word as an opportunity to deepen our relationship with uncertainty and develop our trust muscles in ourselves. So that's every Monday. It's a really open and approachable space. So if anyone wants to come check it out, it's Mondays, 8:30 Eastern, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, and that flowing with unknowingness, I'll drop the link in the moment. And there's another game, so that's the flowing with unknowingness Tyson does is in our Wisdom Gym. We have another game going to be entering the Wisdom Gym, the Glass Bead game. Lawrence Curry Clark, he previewed it this weekend, and he's going to come in every Saturday. I think it's at 6 p.m. Eastern time. It's going to start I think in October. That's going to be dope. It's going to be weekly. Check out the events at thestoa.ca. If you like what we're doing here, whatever we're doing here, if you want to help us steal the culture and support it, you can support us on Patreon. There's a link right there. Yeah, that being said, Eric, Jamie, thanks again, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Stoa today.
Thank you. See you guys.
Thanks, Jamie.